There's a dangerous mistake people keep making with empaths. They think kindness means weakness. They think because an empath stays silent, forgives too much, understands too deeply, and loves too purely, that they can be pushed forever without consequences. But what most people never realize is this. The moment you finally break an empath, you awaken a version of them that no one is prepared for. Because empaths don't explode immediately, they absorb, they tolerate, they carry pain quietly while pretending everything is fine. They sit in rooms full of fake smiles and still try to protect everyone else's feelings while their own heart is collapsing in silence. And that's exactly why people underestimate them. They mistake patience for submission, compassion for fragility, softness for dependence. But an empath is not weak. An empath is controlled power. And the most dangerous thing about controlled power is what happens when it finally stops controlling itself. You see, most people have never witnessed the final stage of an empath. They only know the loving version, the forgiving version, the version that gives second chances even when they shouldn't. But there comes a point where the empath becomes emotionally exhausted. Not angry, not dramatic, just done. And when an empath becomes done, something terrifying happens. They detach completely. That's the part nobody talks about. Because when an empath stops caring, they do it with the same intensity they once loved you with. Suddenly the person who used to check on you disappears emotionally. The one who used to stay awake fixing everyone's problems no longer answers. The one who used to beg for honesty no longer asks questions. And people become shocked by this transformation because they never thought the empath would actually leave mentally, emotionally, spiritually. But they do. And when they do, they leave forever inside. The scary part is not an empath screaming at you. The scary part is when they become silent. Cold silence from an empath is different. It's not revenge, it's realization. They finally understand that some people only value love after destroying the person who gave it. So the empath stops explaining, stops defending themselves, stops trying to be understood. They simply watch people expose who they really are. And this is where regret begins. Because the same people who ignored the empath value suddenly feel their absence everywhere. They realize nobody else listened like them. Nobody else cared that deeply. Nobody else loved without selfish motives. The world is full of attention, but very few people offer genuine emotional presence. Empaths do. And once that energy disappears, people feel empty in ways they cannot explain. That's why broken empaths become unforgettable. Not because they seek revenge, but because they evolve. Pain changes an empath differently than it changes everyone else. Most people become bitter after betrayal. Empaths become awakened. They start seeing manipulation faster. They stop chasing approval. They stop shrinking themselves to make toxic people comfortable. And the version that emerges after heartbreak is almost untouchable mentally. Because now they know exactly what human beings are capable of. An empath who has suffered deeply develops a terrifying level of emotional intelligence. They can read energy before words are spoken. They can sense lies hidden behind smiles. They can feel intentions without needing proof. And once they learn this, they never return to innocence again. That innocent version died the moment people took their kindness for granted. The truth is, empaths are dangerous when broken, because they no longer fear losing people. That's the shift. Before, they feared abandonment because they loved deeply. But after enough betrayal, they realize something powerful. Losing fake people is not loss, it's freedom. And once an empath understands that, their entire personality changes. The most dangerous moment is not when an empath cries, it's not when they argue, it's not even when they finally tell you how much pain you caused them. The most dangerous moment is when they become emotionally silent. Because that silence is not weakness anymore. It is the sound of a heart finally disconnecting after surviving too much disappointment. People don't understand empaths because empaths love in a way this world rarely sees anymore. They love with patience, with loyalty, with emotional presence. While everyone else is calculating value, empaths are giving pieces of their soul away, trying to make others feel safe, understood, and accepted. They walk into broken people's lives and try to heal wounds they did not create. They stay when others leave. They forgive things they should never forgive. And because of that, people slowly start believing the empath will tolerate anything. That is the biggest mistake anyone can make. Because every ignored feeling leaves a scar inside the empath. Every betrayal gets stored silently. Every fake apology chips away at their emotional connection. But the empath rarely reacts immediately. They keep trying, keep understanding, keep hoping the other person will finally realize the damage they are causing. And this is exactly why toxic people become comfortable hurting them. They mistake patience for permission. But what nobody notices is that while the empath stays physically present, emotionally they are slowly dying inside. There comes a point where the empath becomes exhausted from carrying relationships alone, tired of being the only one who cares deeply, tired of overthinking every conversation while others sleep peacefully after causing pain, tired of giving loyalty to people who only return confusion. And one day something shifts inside them permanently. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. The empath stops reacting. That's when everything changes. The person who once sent long messages explaining their feelings suddenly says nothing. The person who once begged for honesty suddenly stops asking questions. The person who used to fight for the relationship suddenly becomes emotionally still. And most people don't recognize the danger of this moment, because they think silence means the empath is calming down. No, the empath is detaching. An emotional detachment from an empath is one of the coldest transformations a human being can witness. Because once an empath reaches that point, they no longer feel the need to prove their value. They stop chasing closure. They stop trying to convince people to love them correctly. Something inside them finally realizes that real love should not require constant suffering. That realization changes them forever. Now the empath watches differently. They notice every inconsistency, every manipulation, every half-hearted effort, and instead of confronting it emotionally like before, they simply become distant internally. Their energy disappears first. Their warmth fades slowly. Their emotional investment dies in silence long before they physically leave. And the terrifying part is, people usually notice too late. Because humans have a dangerous habit. They only appreciate deep souls after damaging them beyond repair. They take the empath's loyalty for granted because they think it will always be there. They believe the empath's forgiving nature means infinite tolerance. But what they fail to understand is this: every empath has a limit. And once that limit is crossed, the connection breaks completely inside. Not temporarily, permanently. That's why when an empath finally walks away emotionally, they rarely come back the same. The love that once felt endless suddenly disappears. The emotional access people once had becomes locked forever. And now the same people who ignored the empath begin panicking because they can feel the shift. The empath no longer reacts to manipulation, no longer chases, no longer begs, no longer explains, and toxic people become terrified when they lose emotional control over someone they once took for granted. Because they realize something too late. Genuine love is rare. Anyone can pretend to care in good moments. Anyone can fake affection when it benefits them. But empaths loved people during their darkness, during their chaos, during their worst phases. They gave emotional safety to people who often did not deserve it. And once that emotional support disappears, people feel an emptiness they cannot replace. That's why the absence of an empath feels haunting. Not because the empath was perfect, but because their love was real. And real love is impossible to replace with temporary attention. The scary thing about a detached empath is that they stop needing validation from the people who hurt them. Before, they desperately wanted understanding. They wanted honesty. They wanted emotional consistency. But after enough pain, they realize something life-changing. Some people will never value you no matter how deeply you love them. That truth destroys the empath's innocence. But it also awakens their power. Now they stop shrinking themselves for toxic people. They stop overextending their energy trying to save relationships that are draining their soul. They begin protecting their peace instead of sacrificing it. And the same person who once tolerated emotional neglect becomes impossible to manipulate. Because now they see everything clearly. They see who only contacts them when lonely, who uses guilt to control them, who pretends to care only when losing access to them, who enjoys receiving love but refuses to give it. And once an empath sees the truth clearly, emotional blindness never returns again. That is why people regret breaking an empath. Not because the empath seeks revenge, but because the empath eventually becomes unavailable forever. Emotionally unavailable to toxicity, unavailable to lies, unavailable to fake love, unavailable to people who only appreciated them after destroying them. And nothing hurts more than realizing you lost someone who genuinely cared while you still had the chance to protect them. Because once an empath finally stops caring, the silence they leave behind becomes louder than every word they ever spoke. Pain does not destroy a true empath. Pain reveals them. It forces them to become someone deeper, sharper, wiser, and emotionally untouchable. While most people collapse under betrayal, an empath transforms through it. That is what makes them different from everyone else. They do not simply survive emotional pain. They absorb it, understand it, and eventually turn it into power. But nobody sees that transformation happening in real time. Because when an empath is suffering, they rarely show the full extent of their pain. They smile while breaking inside. They comfort others while secretly feeling abandoned themselves. They carry emotional weight that would mentally destroy most people, yet still walk through life pretending they are okay. And this is exactly why the world misunderstands them. People think the empath is weak because they are sensitive, but sensitivity is not weakness. Sensitivity is awareness. It is the ability to feel everything deeply in a world where most people feel nothing honestly. And the painful truth is this: the deeper an empath feels, the more betrayal changes them forever. Every lie teaches them something. Every heartbreak opens their eyes wider. Every manipulation sharpens their emotional instincts. At first, the empath blames themselves for everything. That's how deeply they care. They replay conversations in their head for hours, wondering what they could have done differently. They question their worth. They overanalyze every mistake. They try to fix relationships even when they are the ones bleeding emotionally. And toxic people take advantage of this beautiful but dangerous trait. Because manipulators love empathetic people. Empaths are forgiving, patient, emotionally available, easy to guilt, easy to emotionally drain. And for a long time, the empath keeps believing love can heal everyone. They keep trying to understand toxic behavior instead of protecting themselves from it. They keep giving second chances to people who never deserved the first one. But eventually, pain becomes too repetitive to ignore. That's when the awakening begins. The empath starts noticing patterns. They notice how certain people only appear when they need emotional support, how some people disappear when the empath is struggling, how fake apologies repeat the same damage again and again, how emotional manipulators always play the victim after causing pain. And suddenly the empath begins seeing human nature differently than before. Not emotionally. Clearly, that clarity changes everything. Because once an empath develops emotional awareness through suffering, they become incredibly difficult to deceive. Their intuition becomes terrifyingly accurate. They can sense dishonesty through energy alone. They notice changes in tone, behavior, eye contact, effort, consistency. While others ignore red flags, the empath feels them immediately. Not because they are paranoid, because pain trained them to recognize emotional danger before it destroys them again. And people underestimate how powerful this transformation really is. A healed empath becomes emotionally intelligent in ways that cannot be taught through books or motivational speeches. Their wisdom comes from surviving emotional wars nobody even knew they were fighting. They know what betrayal feels like. They know what abandonment feels like. They know what it feels like to love people who slowly destroy you mentally while pretending to care. And because they survived that pain, they stop fearing it. That is the moment the empath becomes dangerous. Because the empath who no longer fears losing people cannot be controlled anymore. Before the awakening, the empath tolerated disrespect because they feared abandonment. They stayed too long because they believed loyalty meant enduring pain. They kept giving because they hoped people would eventually love them the same way back. But suffering teaches the empath one brutal lesson. Not everyone deserves access to your heart. And once they truly understand that, their energy changes permanently. Now they stop explaining themselves to people committed to misunderstanding them. They stop begging for consistency. They stop fighting for one-sided relationships. They stop sacrificing their mental health to keep toxic people comfortable. And suddenly the empath, who once felt emotionally fragile, becomes emotionally disciplined. Cold? No. Wise. There's a massive difference. The empath still has a good heart after healing. They still care deeply, still love deeply, still understand pain better than most people ever will. But now they combine compassion with boundaries. And that combination is powerful enough to terrify manipulative people. Because manipulators survive through emotional confusion. Healed empaths no longer live in confusion. They see intentions clearly. They recognize emotional games instantly. They understand when someone is using affection as control, and once an empath sees manipulation clearly, they disconnect without guilt. That's what shocks people the most. The empath, who once tolerated everything, suddenly walks away calmly. No drama, no revenge, no emotional chaos, just peace, just distance, just emotional clarity, and toxic people cannot handle that version of the empath because they lost access to someone they thought would stay forever. And pain created that version, not comfort, not happiness, pain. That's why suffering becomes the empath's greatest teacher. Every betrayal teaches them discernment. Every heartbreak teaches them self-respect. Every disappointment teaches them emotional independence. And eventually the empath realizes something life-changing. The same sensitivity that once made them vulnerable is actually their greatest strength, because they can feel truth before others see it. They can sense danger before others recognize it. They can read emotional energy in ways logic alone never could. And after enough suffering, they stop apologizing for that gift. The awakened empath becomes selective with energy. They stop allowing everyone into their emotional world. They no longer chase connection desperately. They value peace more than attention. And that emotional discipline creates a presence that feels almost untouchable. People can sense it. The empath no longer looks for validation, no longer fears rejection, no longer needs approval to recognize their worth. That confidence was built through emotional survival, and survival changed them into someone stronger than the people who once tried to break them. Because pain either destroys a person or introduces them to the strongest version of themselves they never knew existed. The greatest power of an empath is not their kindness, it is not their sensitivity, it is not even their ability to understand people deeply. The greatest power of an empath is their ability to suffer without becoming cruel. In a world where pain turns most people cold, selfish, and emotionally numb, the empath somehow survives heartbreak after heartbreak and still refuses to lose their humanity. That kind of strength is rare. Most people only know how to love when life is easy. But empaths continue loving even after disappointment, even after betrayal, even after being emotionally destroyed by the very people they tried to protect. And this is what makes them different from everyone else. They know exactly how painful this world can be, yet they still choose compassion over hatred. People have no idea how difficult that actually is. Because pain changes people. A single betrayal can make someone emotionally unavailable forever. One heartbreak can turn a loving person into someone filled with anger and distrust. One traumatic experience can harden a soul permanently. That is why the world is filled with emotionally closed people. They suffered once and decided never to feel deeply again. But empaths are different. They feel everything deeply and still refuse to become emotionally dead inside. And that is power beyond anything most people understand. An empath knows what rejection feels like. They know what it feels like to give their whole heart to someone who slowly destroys them, emotionally. They know the pain of being misunderstood, ignored, replaced, manipulated, abandoned. They know what it feels like to sit alone carrying emotional wounds nobody can see. Yet somehow, they continue treating others gently, not because they are weak, because they are strong enough to stop pain from turning them evil. That strength is spiritual. Anyone can spread darkness after being hurt. Anyone can become toxic after betrayal. Anyone can weaponize their trauma and start hurting others the way they were hurt. But empaths fight a different battle. They fight the war inside themselves every single day. The war between staying soft or becoming cold. Between staying loving or becoming bitter. Between keeping faith in humanity or giving up completely. And despite everything, they still choose light. That choice takes unbelievable emotional strength. Because the truth is, empaths often suffer in silence while everyone around them assumes they are okay. They become emotional support systems for broken people while secretly breaking themselves. They absorb negative energy constantly. They overthink every conversation. They carry guilt for things that were never their fault. And after years of emotional exhaustion, something inside them begins to crack. Not their kindness, their innocence. That's the painful transformation nobody talks about. The empath eventually realizes that not everyone has a heart like theirs. Not everyone feels guilt after hurting someone. Not everyone values loyalty. Not everyone appreciates genuine love. And this realization shatters the empath emotionally, because they spent their entire life believing honesty and kindness would naturally be returned. But life teaches them differently. Life teaches them that some people only take Some people only use. Some people only appear when they need healing, attention, comfort, validation. And once they feel emotionally full again, they disappear without caring about the damage they caused. That realization could easily turn the empath hateful, but instead, it turns them wiser. That is their real power. The empath learns how to protect their heart without poisoning it. They learn how to create boundaries without becoming cruel. They learn how to walk away without needing revenge. And this emotional maturity makes them incredibly powerful, because now they operate from clarity instead of emotional desperation. Before healing, the empath begged for love. After healing, they observe actions quietly. Before healing, they tolerated disrespect, hoping people would change. After healing, they leave at the first sign of repeated dishonesty. Before healing, they sacrifice themselves to save everyone else. After healing, they understand that self-destruction is not love. That evolution changes the empath completely. Now their kindness becomes selective instead of limitless. Their energy becomes protected instead of freely available. And the people who once benefited from the empath's endless compassion suddenly lose access to them forever. That's when regret begins for those who took them for granted. Because people rarely understand the value of a genuine soul until they lose it. The world is full of fake attention, temporary affection, shallow conversations, and emotionally unavailable people pretending to care. But empaths bring something deeper into people's lives. They make people feel emotionally seen, safe, understood, accepted, and once that energy disappears, the emptiness becomes impossible to ignore. That's why losing an empath feels different. You don't simply lose a person, you lose emotional warmth, you lose loyalty, you lose peace. You lose someone who genuinely cared about your pain, even when nobody cared about theirs. And the terrifying part is, empaths rarely return once they emotionally detach. Because surviving pain taught them something priceless. Protecting their peace is not selfish. It is necessary. Now the empath no longer feels responsible for saving everyone. They no longer chase emotionally unavailable people. They no longer ignore red flags hoping love will magically fix broken behavior. Instead, they become deeply aware of energy. They pay attention to consistency, effort, intentions, respect, emotional safety. And suddenly the empath who once looked emotionally fragile becomes emotionally unshakable. Not because they stopped feeling, because they finally learned when to stop giving. That lesson changes their entire life. Now they understand that having a kind heart does not mean tolerating abuse. Forgiveness does not mean access. Compassion does not mean self-sacrifice. And loving deeply does not require destroying yourself for people who would never do the same. For you. That realization creates a different kind of empath, a quieter empath, a wiser empath, a more powerful empath. Someone who still carries love inside their soul but refuses to hand it to people who only know how to break things. And that is why the empath's greatest strength will always be this. They survived pain that could have turned them cruel, and still chose to remain human.